Hi everybody, good morning and welcome to General Thinking right here on the streets of Barangaroo. It's fantastic to be here. My name's Fenella Kernebone. I'm very stoked to be introducing your great guests today. This is the very first in a really amazing series of lively talks and discussions and conversations and debates and big old chats that's happening here in Barangaroo, and we're really happy to be here. And what's great about it is because we're talking about what it means to live in our city, to be in our city, and in this beautiful city of Sydney. So some great speakers for you this morning. I'll introduce them to you in just a moment, but you can't really start without talking to the fella who's kicked this off. His name is Remo Giuffré. Would you please make him welcome? G'day, Remo.
Thanks, Fenella, and welcome everybody. What an exciting day. It's the first, as Fenella said, in this series, and I just really wanted to take just literally 3 minutes to explain the context. That's General Thinking. It's a network that I founded nearly 15 years ago in New York and then put to sleep for 10 years and just brought back a couple of years ago. It's basically a social network of people all over the world who are doing interesting things and interesting work. We've got 1,082 people in this network as of last night when I took those screenshots. They span the gamut from philosophers to scientists to butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, the whole thing. The philosophy is embodied by this logo, which has all of those spectral colours encircling the black and the white there. The colours represent the functional areas that the thinkers work within. And this logo represents the fact that these people work side by side, collaboratively, on problems with a view to generating ideas and solutions. So it's about cross-functionality and it's about diversity. And in all of my experience working on the Remo General Store or TEDx Sydney or all of the other stuff that I've done over the years, what's come home to me is the fact that really good stuff comes when you smash together people from different categories. So that's why today's panel is not three architects. It's an architect and a journalist and whatever the word is that Milkwood does. You can talk to that. So the philosophy of General Thinking is to do good work, but also to have some fun and not take ourselves too seriously. So the network is about events, it's about services, it's about places, experiences and media, and this is very excitingly our first step into the event services area, and I really have to tip my hat to Tasha and her team at the Streets of Barangaroo and Lendlease for creating this wonderful environment within which we're going to be presenting this series. So without further ado, I will pass back to Fenella and she can get things rolling. Thanks.
Big round of applause. Thank you, Remo. Thank you so much. So yes, on the streets of Barangaroo, presented by General Thinking, it's great to be here, but what are we talking about today as you're eating some really amazing food here in the Canteen, which is a really wonderful space? Well, we're talking about growing food in small spaces, whether it's on a tiny balcony. We're talking about the idea of densification and how that might impact on our gardening spaces in our city. And of course, maybe the magic of soil. I've never considered the magic of soil until perhaps today, so I'm excited about that. And why is this important? I like stats, so here are some stats for you. According to the ABS, put my nerdy voice on, next year, 2016, Sydney's population is going to be 5 million people. By 2050, it'll be 8 million people. Quite a significant increase, 3 million more mouths to feed. I always have seconds, don't know about you. So that kind of stuff is going to impact on us more and more. And we know that producing food in a climate that is ever-changing will always have massive amounts of challenges for us, but it also presents some really fantastic opportunities. And if you think about all the kinds of things that are happening in our city, there's some really ambitious plans for the Bays precincts. Just over yonder, there's a lot of excitement about what's happening and of course the challenges with the second city of Parramatta. And then we think about what's happening right here at Barangaroo, where particularly in the south section, we're having this, basically a new quarter of our city is kind of being built overnight. Well, 5 or 6 years or so. It's pretty quick. These things usually take a few years to evolve, so this is happening very quickly. So the notion of what density actually means in our urban and our peri-urban areas is increasingly important, something that we really have to think about, particularly when it comes to growing our food. But how do you do that? How do you retain the skill, the creativity, the beauty, the sexiness of our gorgeous city of Sydney and still manage to create a space that can create food and makes us feel welcoming and connected? All big ideas. So, and this is something that I think Indira will talk about. You'll all talk about this idea that maybe in the future, by 2050, when I'm an old lady and hopefully a grandma, I might be actually having an urban garden on my rooftop because I'll be living in a nice, dense neighbourhood. That's not so far-fetched. Maybe we'll be growing food in between our alleyways and our streets. Maybe the Canteen will actually be growing food in every single little corner. It might seem a bit bizarre now, but it's not really. This stuff is happening already. It's mandated in many communities, in Singapore, in France, maybe in Australia, you never know, pretty soon. So this is the kind of stuff that we're talking about today that I'm kind of excited about. And partly it's because it's an opportunity for us to think about what we mean as a community, how we connect together as a community. And also, and this is something that Jess Miller, who's the organiser or the curator of today, and she's really awesome, she was talking about, it's the promotion of biophilia. Biophilia, which is the innate connection that humans have with nature. And the idea, of course, that we are happiest, and I've got to quote you here, Jess, because it's so cute, that we are happiest when we have the opportunity to smell the jasmine, to listen to the birds, and tickle the worms. Cheeky little things that they are. So that's what we're talking about today. It's going to be great to hear from our three speakers. Sacha Coles is up first. You might have seen his pretty mug on the boardings and the hoardings around here at Barangaroo. He's also the director of Aspect Studio. He's had a lot to do with the public domain here at Barangaroo South, and he's also just recently been pretty heavily involved in the goods line. Sacha, stand up, welcome. Round of applause. Indira Naidoo. You might recognise from the telly. She's written a couple of books. She's talked about how to grow food on balconies, and most recently she's created some pretty amazing sort of urban spaces, but particularly on top of the Wayside Chapel. I love you, Indira. It's so great to see you. Stand up, Indira Naidoo. And Nick Ritar is someone who is the director of Milkwood Permaculture along with his partner Kirsten. And he reminded me before, and I'm going to get you to talk about it, he reminded me the last time I met Nick was apparently in it was an old abandoned decayed church in Berlin about 15 years ago. And there is a reason why I can't remember that very well. Would you please welcome Nick Ritar? Sacha Coles, talking about our cities. Please make him welcome.
Thank you. Morning all. Thanks Fenella, and I love the fact that Fenella said that Barangaroo happened overnight. That's great. You all know that's not quite the case, but it feels fantastic to be here. I'm going to set the scene a little bit, talk about the role of the evolving city. Where are we? What are the opportunities at a very local level for government, for development, to really take up the mantle and look at some leftover space in our city as opportunities for making a better place to live. So I'm going to start, you all know this slide here. We're looking at Sydney. Sydney's very similar to many cities. Fenella talked about the growth that's happening right now, but we're going through a rapid process of urbanisation. People are flocking back to the cities, which is a great thing. It gives much more potential for aggregating our big moves and being far more sustainable if we're all in one place together. The facts are, Fenella mentioned this as well, by 2050, we're going to be about 8 million people. Where are they going to be? Well, they're going to be everywhere, but predominantly they're going to be in the city and in the city domain. And that means higher urban density living. This one here I think is pretty good. We know it's very well documented. There is a very positive relationship between proximity to greenery in general, and in particular residents. Residents' feeling of life satisfaction is greatly increased the closer they have to urban green space and great parks. The sad thing is that the current trends for urban green space are declining in our urban areas. So how do we address that? One of the things that I'm particularly interested in is the 60% of our urban environment which is made up of streets and roofs. This area is a largely untapped resource, and I see that, and the work we're doing at the moment in the office is really to push the boundaries on particularly green roofs and making great green streets which contribute to our well-being. So I'll talk a little bit about that. At the very local level, this is where I'm beginning to work. This is my street. This is Redfern. This is the lane behind my house here. We've taken a really great lead from, some of you may know Macalone Street in Surrey Hills. It's a fantastic precedent, community driven. Over time, they've just put out pot plants and it's become this kind of little extension of their houses, this urban park. It's a street. We started doing this probably a year ago, one pot plant. In fact, it was just a basin. And our little community has taken what really was just a car-centric laneway, roller doors to the street, pretty dead, and turned it into something which is quite magical. People smile when they come past here. Our kids are always out in the laneway. It is very much an extension of our house. So it doesn't have to be huge. It just can be a humble act of benevolence. This one up here is my front yard, and we took away our fence, used the palings in that fence just to create a bench on the street. And again, it's just a little symbol to people who are walking past of how generous we want the neighbourhood to be. A lot of the old ladies, after going to Surrey Hills Mall and having their bags or picking vegetables from our community garden, it sounds very ideal, but it's actually true, will come and sit here and either have a smoke and a chat or just go back home. So again, it doesn't have to be huge and heroic, it just has to be generous. The goods line, a project which has just been completed, shows great, I think, government leadership in terms of what's possible with leftover spaces. It's not a street, it's a kind of street. It's a street for pedestrians and cyclists, and it's a connecting piece of infrastructure. Whilst it isn't a street, the goods line does connect two streets, MacArthur and Mary Ann Street, and by doing that, it's actually reconnected Ultimo, currently the most dense urban environment in Australia, back into the city. Not only does it create connection, it also creates a whole series of inclusive spaces. Places for community, exercise areas, social gathering areas. This was a recent shot from the Sydney Architecture Festival where the goods line was used as the main venue for that day. And this is a shot here of the Sydney Architecture Festival short film festival, which was on that site, which was fantastic. Children's play, but also the opportunity just to reinstate some urban greenery, to create some biodiversity in an otherwise kind of forgotten and isolating part of the city. You probably will all know this project as well, in the south of the city, One Central Park. Another project that we've been involved in. The reason I'm showing this is because it really is the benchmark in terms of living architecture. And by living architecture, I'm talking about green roofs, green walls, growing facades. The developers in this case have really taken greenery and urban greenery as a kind of a brand for their development. And I think it's a good model. Clearly, it's been a kind of a successful symbol for urban greenery because it's so visible to the public. But also some of the facts around it, it's really pushed the envelope. It's the largest green facade in Australia. If you lined up the 2,700 planter boxes which are on the facade there, they'll stretch from Central Park to the airport. It's 7 kilometres of planters. It's a huge investment, and these are the kinds of investments that we need. Even if they're experiments, we need this sector, we need the development sector to push it and champion it. There's a whole lot of facts here about what it does technically, but essentially I think this is the most important one, that it achieves all those metrics that we all strive for at the beginning of projects, which is 5 green stars for residential and also retail. This conversation around green infrastructure is a really important one. Where we are today embodies a whole range of sustainability initiatives, some of which are invisible, some of which are visible. If you go upstairs on level 3 here, you'll see that terraces are used to great effect. Buildings are starting to be greened here on the waterfront, and that's exactly what this diagram talks about, which is that it's a complete system. So living architecture, we talk about the facades and the roofs. The roofs and the streets, as I mentioned before, 60% of our urban environment. There is a huge potential for us to do better. The streets, great opportunity to treat streets as places for urban forests. So fantastic street trees which are connected. Also talk about integrated water systems, and that's the capture of water from roofs. It's taking it through buildings, it's reusing it like we do here in this building, but also in the public realm, in the urban environment as well, to create denser green streets with underplanting and use water-sensitive urban design. All of these things work together to make fantastic places, but also to cool the environment as well. So here are some of the benefits, and I want to leave you with this. Stormwater management, obviously reducing the amount that leaves a site, that's critical. It's a precious resource. We need to do better with our water management. Energy reduction, something which, of course, ticks the bottom line for buildings in terms of facilities management. Fantastic that it costs less to run these buildings. It also reduces the general ambient heat. Urban heat island effect, particularly these kind of precinct developments like Barangaroo, like Central Park, like others that are happening around Sydney. There's the great opportunity to bring down the urban heat island effect and help even globally. The other things that are really important, resilience. How do we deal with a changing environment? Without anything we can do, it's changing around us. We need to adapt to it. We need to be resilient. Human well-being, and finally, biodiversity. Why can't we have a fantastic environment for birds, for bees, for bugs in our cities, to get closer and have direct proximity to nature? This is possible on our rooftops, but particularly in our streets. And so hopefully I've set a little scene for the opportunities for that to happen, and I think you're about to see some projects where this has been realised. Over to you, Fenella. So thank you.
Sacha Coles, thank you very much. So talking, of course, about the imaginative use of our cities, our living architecture. So thank you, Sacha. Indira Naidoo, as I said, almost needs no introduction. She's got a brand new book, which is on the table, that I'm sure she'll refer to a little bit, but talking about imaginative ideas in our city, imaginative things to do on our balcony. Would you please welcome Indira Naidoo?
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. I'm currently on a national and then going on to America book tour for the book The Edible City that all of you have been given a copy of. So thank you very much for Lendlease for organising that. So it's wonderful to be in a group that is very much involved in the built environment. I've talked to food growing groups, farmers groups in the Blue Mountains yesterday, refugee groups. There's so many different parts of our society that are now concerned about how we make our cities greener and more sustainable, and more particularly how we feed our communities. What happened to me? How do you go from being a news anchor to an urban farmer? It was quite an unusual journey, I suppose. But when I started looking at the news stories we were covering every night, I was not only getting frustrated that things weren't changing, we kept on saying the same thing every week, every month, every year. Nothing seemed to be changing fast enough for me. But also I could see that there were two key drivers for every conflict and every issue that we seem to be on the news, but not giving our viewers that sort of overall story. And really, whether it was a ethnic conflict in Africa, whether it was a food shortage and an extreme climate event, it was all really being driven by food and water shortages, and ultimately by the climate change that we're going through on the planet. But unfortunately, in a news point of view, we would just, sort of isolate each story, and we weren't giving people that big view. So I took some long service leave, did a bit of travelling, spent some time in Africa and Asia and America, and started to realise how much we weren't telling people about what was really going on. I came back to Australia, started working for Choice, the consumer advocacy group, ran some national food programs, got a role with the United Nations in Geneva, the International Trade Centre, running some global food programs for them. And this was during 2007-8, when really the issue of climate change was starting to become on the national agenda for most governments around the world. I came back to Australia and got a climate change traineeship with former US Vice President Al Gore, and that was quite a transformational year for me because I was embedded into communities. So as a journalist, you assume you know what's going on, and I quickly realised I had no idea what was going on. I spent time with coal miners in the Hunter, with groups of nuns in Papua New Guinea who were also having to incorporate the challenges of climate change. And when I came back to my apartment in Potts Point, I realised that now intellectually I understood the issues and some of the drivers, but how was I going to change my lifestyle to accommodate some of these changes? And I was part of the problem. Most of us live in cities, most of us are disconnected from our food and our environment. We go to work, we've outsourced our life, someone else cooks for us, grows our food, looks after our children, and we've left ourselves to the worst bit of life, which is the boring work bit, and all the fun bits other people get to do for us. So I was standing on my balcony on the 13th floor of my apartment in Potts Point, and 20 square metres is all it is. And I said, well, this is all the space I have. I want to grow my food. I want to be more connected to the environment, but this is just tiles and glass and concrete. What if I transform this space? So I didn't know what I was doing really, which is always a good place to start. That's what I recommend. I got some pots and some soil. I went to a farmer's market actually just before I started planting, and I came across a wonderful farmer that gave me some cherry tomatoes to try. And I put one in my mouth, and honestly, it was the best tomato I'd ever tasted or ever remember tasting since I was a kid. Sweet, juicy, great, crunchy skin. And I realised that taste was going to be a really important driver for so much of this that happens. Because when you become disconnected from nature, you also become disconnected from taste. You'll put anything in your mouth. I mean, you think of the stuff that you eat. You have no idea, actually, is it really food? And having a great real tomato reminded me that I wanted to taste that sort of thing more often. So I saved the seeds from that tomato. I planted them, and now 9 years later, I'm still getting tomatoes on my balcony from that first seed that I planted. So for me, that tomato was the moment, the light bulb moment for me. What happened after that? It was really just going to be growing a few things on my balcony. In that year, I grew 70 kilos of produce, 43 different herbs and vegetables. From the tomatoes, there were pumpkins, lemons, strawberries, you name it. Everything you can grow on the ground I grew on a balcony, except for garlic, which it just doesn't get cold enough in Potts Point for garlic, unfortunately. But I got some very tasty garlic shoots in my pot. And I was, probably as surprised as everyone else. The book became a bestseller. I now travel, it's been launched in Hong Kong, New York, London, other cities that are facing the same urban pressures as we are in Sydney. And it led to me getting a phone call from this wonderful actor, David Wenham, who lives in Potts Point as well, and he'd gone into the local bookshop, seen my book, and he's an ambassador for the Wayside Chapel, a wonderful organisation that helps people in crisis who are homeless, drug affected, depression issues. And they had recently just completed an extension of their old building, and it had won a wonderful architectural award for all its green qualities, natural airflow, no air conditioning, a green roof that they were putting in, photovoltaic cells, rainwater tank collection, water collection. But they put in the green roof, but they didn't this is a shot of my balcony, so you can see it's quite a small space. And I've used all the vertical spaces to increase my productivity, so vertical walls and hanging basket systems as well. And I've designed the pots so that they capture the extra water that flows through, so I'm reducing a bit of the water usage. That's my urban farmer's shot, Indira the farmer pulling out carrots out of my pot, which was quite an amazing moment. So this is the new extension that the Wayside built, and they put this wonderful rooftop garden on top of it, 200 square metres in these raised recycled plastic pots, but they didn't have gardeners to actually run it. So David got in touch with me and said, would you be interested in running the garden classes? And I said, of course. Really admire what the Wayside does. And when you become a gardener, there's no space is enough. You just want to keep on gardening and growing more and putting gardens everywhere. And of course, who says no to David Wenham? So I said yes. And we put together a team of local homeless visitors, local horticulturalists, because obviously I'm not a horticulturalist, so we wanted to make sure we got the right plantings, the right soils, and growing on a roof has its own challenges with wind and other sort of drying conditions. And over that first year, we grew something like, it was pretty crazy, 600-700 kilos of produce that now are used in the cafe at the Wayside. And of course, it becomes a really important teaching area for our homeless visitors to learn about not only growing, but how to cook nutritious meals, which is a really big problem, nutrition for people who are homeless. This is Alan, who's become our regular gardener in the Wayside garden. He has been suffering depression most of his life, and the looking forward to looking after the plants has been such an important way for him to deal with his mental health. And we take garden tours of the Wayside. In fact, we've got 2 coming up on November the 7th and 14th, Saturday mornings. If you want to come, the details are on the Wayside website. And Alan was telling one of our last tours that he was really surprised the Wayside had asked him to help on the roof, because being suicidal, a roof maybe is not the best place to be. But it just goes to show being around plants and having a purpose. And again, when you're homeless, you not only don't have a home, obviously, but you don't have a garden either. So for him to be able to plant seeds and watch plants grow was an important piece of horticultural therapy for his recovery. So everyone has jobs in the garden, which is lovely. So again, this is what I love about gardening in terms of a way of helping people connect to their food and their environment. You can never know too little or never know too much. You learn something every day, and there's so many different skills you have to start becoming comfortable with, whether it's planting and watering. This is Pee-wee hugging the curry bush. Again, a day where I don't have my hands in the soil and touching plants, I wouldn't have actually realised this a few years ago before I started gardening, but I really miss it. And I didn't get to water the plants this morning before I came out, so after this I will go straight back to my balcony, get my hands in the soil, and it is a really important connector. The biophilia that Jess talked about, when you start this process, you realise that concrete and tarmac and steel are like just really stresses you out. I can't tell you. It's so hard for me to come into office environments now and be in air conditioning after hanging out in gardens all the time. Again, everything is organic that we grow. We've put on some beehives on the roof. And again, they love putting on their spacesuits and getting the honey out and learning about bees. Our gardens are planted so that they are wonderful bee environments and have bee-friendly plants and flowers. And we bottle our honey, not enough to sell, but we use the honey in the cafe and also give it to our sponsors and supporters. And we have lots of corporate sponsors who come along and have gardening and cooking days. So if you guys would like to be involved, just get in touch with us through our website, and we'd love to have you on board to be part of the whole setup. The other exciting thing is my mate Kylie Kwong, who's just moved to a restaurant from Surrey Hills to across the road at the Wayside, who you probably know is really passionate about incorporating sustainable ideas and produce into her food, said to me, well, how can I get the local community involved in what you're doing at the Wayside? And I said, well, obviously we can't supply you with enough vegetables for a restaurant, but maybe we can supply you with some honey. So she paid for 4 more hives to be put onto the roof, and we now extract that honey for her. The homeless visitors, you can imagine, are so chuffed that a famous chef would want to use their honey, and she uses it in her pork buns on the menu. So if you go along to Billy Kwong and have the pork buns, the reason they're so delicious is because of Wayside honey. And every year, you may have heard, we close down Hugh Street and we have a big Christmas lunch for all our homeless visitors in the area. Last year we served 700 lunch meals, and again, as well as donations, we use lots of produce from our garden to serve these wonderful meals. This is a wide shot of that beautiful jewel we've created on top of the Wayside. And again, I love this photo. It's in the book as well, just showing what can be done with all these wasted rooftop terraces and courtyards that currently aren't being productive areas that could be, like the Wayside Garden. And we have lots of functions there. You can hire it for corporate events. Again, finding green spaces in this part of the city is so difficult. It becomes a special place for all the community. Our very happy gardeners. This is one example I want to share with you that's also in the book. It's a restaurant called Messe Verde in Swanston Street in Melbourne. And what they did is they transformed an amazing 7-storey building into new cafes and restaurants, and had this amazing idea to put a rooftop vegetable garden and worm farm. Australia's, we think, first worm farm right on top in the middle of Swanston Street, floating on this building. And again, it's an amazing architectural feat, but also they won the City of Sydney Sustainability Business Award because it's an example of a restaurant growing some of its own food on site and also doing waste reducing and reduction as well. So this is the Hungry Bin, a New Zealand invention worm farm system, and they basically compost most of the waste from the kitchen. There's so much waste that comes from restaurant kitchens. And what's wonderful about composting the waste on site as well, so they're reducing what goes into landfill and the costs to the business, but the worms are creating this wonderful nutritious worm wee and worm poo, which is like pseudoephedrine for your plants, and they mix it with water and it's seriously good stuff. Costa's actually been known to drink some of it too. Over the plants. And again, that makes them more nourishing, more delicious. And Kathy, the chef, uses the ingredients on the roof to add to her Mesoamerican dishes that she creates. And again, another beautiful space that you wouldn't imagine floating in the middle of what would normally be ugly air conditioning systems on top of a building that you can also hire out for events as well. This is a story that's very dear to my heart. Back to Sydney, to Redfern. It's a school called the Mount Carmel School, where the kids are 89% from Indigenous backgrounds, incredibly poor area. And this school had noticed that the kids coming to school were suffering from poor nutrition, and that was affecting concentration and school results. So they dug up part of the tarmac at the school and put in an Indigenous bush tucker garden to address both their health and reconnecting the kids to nature, but also to their Indigenous heritage that they, being urban Indigenous kids, didn't know much about. The school teachers didn't have permission within the curriculum, so they did it in their lunch hour, and wonderful teachers. So they set up garden club, and they rounded up some kids and enticed them with the promise of muffins after they'd done hard work in the garden. And they got to kids to work, learning how to grow, how to mulch, and composting, all the jobs in the garden. This is beautiful Liam, who, hard to imagine, when he started garden class as a 6-year-old, had never eaten a piece of fresh fruit and vegetable in his life. Everything had been frozen or takeaway or reheated or tinned or canned. And when the teacher gave him a pumpkin seed to plant his pumpkins and cucumber seeds, he didn't believe her that little thing could become a huge pumpkin. He thought she was pulling his leg. He'd never seen anything like it. So the transformation that he witnessed and how that changed his food life, his engagement with food, his excitement to eat vegetables. He's now changed what his family does. He's the one that puts vegetables in the shopping trolley when they want to put potato chips in. It's extraordinary when you change a child's life, how they can change their family. All these kids now have left primary school. We did this book over 3 years. They're in high school. And last week we came back and did a launch. And it's so wonderful. They're now activating for their high school to put in a vegetable garden because they missed their vegetable garden in primary school. And these are them doing their cooking classes. And some of these delicious recipes are in the book as well. Really, really good rhubarb muffins. So again, reimagining that space, it was just a bit of tarmac, and look at the transformation and the change that's made in those children's lives. This is a story from Turramurra, just quickly, I know I'm running a little bit out of time, where there was a disused park on the Pacific Highway on a very bad slope, and no one was using it because it was steep, it would get wet, and I think there were kids smoking dope and all that sort of stuff going on there. So it's wedged between the railway track and a nursing home, and a couple of local residents asked the council if they can convert it into a vegetable garden. And they had a complaint from a ratepayer who said that if there were vegetables growing there, it would bring in the wrong sort of people into Turramurra. Which some people would say would probably be a good thing. But so there's very strange complaints and ideas around the sort of, the people who grow vegetables and what their motivations are. But they managed to get it through council and got to work digging up the park, building a swale to protect against sound and pollution from the freeway. This is all the free area where anyone can pick herbs and flowers and rosemary. And then they set up an allotment-style garden behind that swale. And it's been the most exciting and successful community venture. It's knitted together people from quite different backgrounds, different ages. Nursing home residents have now joined the garden club, got to get around in their walkers, and it's really gorgeous to see. Again, how gardens can help people with social isolation and loneliness issues as well. Beautiful, productive garden, and lovely figs. They have their morning teas on Saturday after garden work. And again, showing how a community can use a garden to strengthen themselves and become resilient. And just quickly, I want to quickly share you this story, going back to Melbourne to a lovely refugee asylum seeker garden in Fitzroy. It's the Fitzroy Community Gardens on Napier Street. This area, for those of you who know the area, has those really ugly tower blocks, lots of social housing, lots of crime, drug usage, and unfortunately, because of the health issues, and a lot of the people have come from conflict and war backgrounds, they suffer a lot of mental health issues as well. They found that everyone was staying within their apartments, terrified to go out in case someone robbed them or something. And so cultivating community, and a wonderful growing group in Victoria got together, got permission to commandeer part of the parkland next to the building, and they developed this wonderful vegetable garden where the residents could grow, most importantly, food from their cultures. And this is the thing that they were losing when they'd go to the vegetable markets, is they didn't have their taro roots or their particular Eastern, Middle Eastern or Asian ingredients, and now they could grow what they were used to cooking and sharing what they grow with each other and sharing recipes as well and building this very, very strong community now. It's really quite beautiful. Once a month they have a big garden lunch. They built a pizza oven in the garden and they make calzone and char grill eggplants and all the different vegetables and come together and share that together, and it's quite transformational. 14 different languages are spoken in that building, so the garden is the common language for everyone. These are just quickly some of the recipes from the book. So it's also about using, as I said, taste to drive people to get involved with the idea of growing their food, because when you start growing something, and an eggplant takes 3 months, you're sitting there thinking, how's that moussaka going to taste? It better be really good. And again, I just want to show you where this can actually go. I've been talking about smaller spaces in the city, but this is the Brooklyn Grange Farm in New York, 2.5 acres in size. This is how big we can go using some of these wasted rooftop spaces. This one's a soil-based model. It has chickens, beehives, office workers exchange working in the farm for produce. It's all done on site where they work, what they grow, where they socialise, and again, New York is, I think, approving 9 green roofs every week because they understand the value of stormwater. And also, New York was affected by the Sandy storm a few years ago, and the entire Manhattan Island was cut off for 3 days by road and rail. There was no food that came into the city for 3 days. So it obviously freaked out the officials, and they realised we need to become more food secure on the island. So they're encouraging as many people as possible to re-look at these urban spaces as ways that they can grow a few things. And this is the Hunterwasser house in Vienna, again showing you a different way that you can live. Why do our apartments have to be grey and boring and horrible? Why do we have this obsession with escaping to coast and bushland? Why can't we bring it more into the city and incorporate it into our lifestyle? Underground railway stations, don't only have to go up, you can go down. This is in London, where a company is using the disused London Railway underground under artificial right to grow herbs and greens. It's fresher, doesn't have to be refrigerated and stored, and goes straight up to the restaurants, and chefs love it. Rather than seeing lawn, which is still great because that's a green roof, I would love to see vegetables on top of Parliament House. When I ever see lawn or empty spaces, I think, why couldn't we be growing veggies there? As someone said in one of my talks recently, well, there's enough manure under there to really fertilise them. So a bit of food for thought. Thank you very much.
Indira Naidoo, I'd like to see some pumpkins up there too. Yeah. Manure underneath, pumpkins on top. Okay, how food and how planting and how gardening can make us feel good. Kind of connected, our final speaker this morning is Nick Ritar. He talks about how things can make us feel good, and please give him a big round of applause. Thank you, Nick. Milkwood Permaculture.
Good morning, everybody. It was great. Sacha was really talking about that large-scale architectural vision for what Sydney can be, and Indira, really bringing the community into it, and those fantastic community projects that are happening right across Australia. I want to talk to you guys really about your personal relationship with this biophilia, or this, as Joel Salatin would call it, the ecological umbilical, which connects you back to your evolution, where you actually came from. I was very lucky. In a way, my personal journey kind of mimics the thing that's happened in society over the last 100 years. I grew up on what was the largest sheep station outside of Queensland in the world. It was a massive 3 million acre sheep station in Western New South Wales called Willandra. I was lucky. I got to live there after it became a national park. So I spent my childhood on this incredible national park where we had sheep and cattle and goats, and we had 13 horses, and we grew all our own vegetables because we were 2 hours' drive from a tiny little hick town. And that was an incredible childhood to have. We had to leave that park when I was about 10 years old, and not long after that, my dad gave me a computer. And as an 11-year-old, getting a computer for the first time, I was incredibly excited by technology, and I became a technologist. I'm an uber geek. I eventually ended up working on the 37th floor of Melbourne Central for Ericsson and Telstra as a software architect, developing video ingestion systems for mobile phones. So I kind of went from this country kid, incredibly naturalistic environment, through to this high-tech super air-conditioned, purified water. All my air was going through a 300 micron HEPA filter to make sure there was no biology in it at all. So I think that my journey has been a lot similar to civilizations in general, just over a condensed time period. And that initial experience that I got, I'm incredibly lucky for that because it connected me to these guys. You know, we're not alone. We live this. It's a complete hubris to imagine ourselves outside of nature. You ever heard someone say to you, you know, I need to get out into a national park to reconnect with nature? It's absolute rubbish. Every breath that you take, on average, has about 20 to 30,000 organisms in it. You are breathing those in. One person entering a room brings 37 million new microorganisms into the air around them. Imagine how many there are right now. Each individual here has about 400 trillion cells in their body. So, Grant, you have about 400 trillion cells in your body. How many of those cells do you think are Grant? How many of those cells are actually human? Only about 100 trillion. You're carrying around about 300 trillion other organisms, single cellular organisms in your body. You're an incredibly complex ecological community. But over this last 100 years of industrialization, we've tried to divorce ourselves from that ecological umbilical. We use antibacterial soaps and we sterilize our bathrooms. We build fences. We microwave our foods. We try to separate ourselves from this. And it's a complete fallacy because every mouthful of food that you have and every breath of air that you take and every bit of water that you drink brings those microorganisms back into you. And the divorce that has happened between us and this ecology has caused us all kinds of terrible problems. This little guy here, this one is Microbacterium vasi. It's growing on a slide there. But this little guy, we've found, actually alleviates pain and nausea, and people who have been injected with it who have lung cancer report a better quality of life. It also happens that there's been a bunch of tests done on this one bacteria lately that when it's injected into mice, it activates a set of serotonin-releasing neurons in the brain, the exact same neurons that are activated when you take Prozac. So this microorganism we have evolved in a symbiotic relationship with this microorganism, and one of the benefits we get from that symbiosis is we feel good. Now, where do you think you might find massive concentrations of this microorganism? In soil. This is one of the most common bacteria that exists in soil. Have you ever met somebody who gardens passionately who's unhappy? It doesn't happen, does it? They're all smiling like Indira. That's because they're getting this hit of drug. Yeah, it's natural Prozac that you're getting as you breathe that in. So today, I've got a little gift for you guys. I think it's actually a business idea, so I shouldn't probably share it, but I got some really fresh soil. 5 o'clock this morning when I left home, I got into this is one of my veggie patches, so I'm growing microgreens there, they're rocket, and I pushed some of the plants aside, and I got a couple of handfuls of the soil out of that garden bed. That's organic, worm fertilised, compost fertilised soil, which we've been looking after for the last year. And I just want you to pass that around, and I want you to have a good sniff of it, because it'll make your whole day feel a hell of a lot better. It really will. There is so many different organisms in there. I don't know what's in it. I take no legal responsibility for the things that you're about to ingest. But those guys, what I do know is in 1 teaspoon of healthy soil, 1 single teaspoon, there's about 10,000 species of bacteria alone, let alone all the microarthropods and the nematodes and the fungi, all those other little critters. Just the bacteria, there's 10,000 species in 1 teaspoon. In 1 teaspoon, there's about 1 billion individual bacteria. So in every teaspoon of that soil. So touch it with your hands, get it into your skin. That stuff is what will keep you happy. And I want to encourage you to start trying to connect back with that ecological umbilical. And this is one of the easiest ways. This is rocket. You have never eaten rocket that tastes like that. You can, unless you've grown it yourself. Indira's eaten rocket probably that good. Anyone else here has grown some rocket in their garden ever? You guys have gotten to have that experience. But it's very, very difficult to produce something so alive and so fresh as what you can do in your garden. Now, there are some great retailers out there who do their absolute best to try and achieve that. But that quality of fresh greens is very, very hard to do. So if you are going to grow anything at all in these tight urban spaces, in that little pot on your balcony or on your windowsill, things like microgreens are a great way to start, because that quality of that food is unbeatable, and it's expensive, but to buy it, and it's incredibly easy to grow. No weeding involved there. What weed could possibly have a hope of trying to get through that? No chemicals required at all, just good quality soil and a little bit of water, and that's it. In this case, we embrace the fact that a whole bunch of different critters come into this garden. So while I was taking the photos for this slideshow yesterday, I found this little guy. He was living, or she probably, was living on my rocket, and she is laying her eggs there. You can actually see where the eggs are on the surface of the rocket there, because her babies are killing machines. Her babies are some of the most aggressive predators in a vegetable garden. And once they hatch, no aphid anywhere in that garden has a hope, because these little guys are going to go and find them and chomp them down. Now, she is a beautiful little creature, isn't she? She's a long-legged fly, an Australian long-legged fly. She's in her adult state, she doesn't eat animals, though. She has to eat pollen and nectar. So in order for her to have a home, we have to have flowers in our garden. Oh no, we have to have flowers in our garden. It's terrible, isn't it? We also need to provide her with a home. So over the weekend, this is my little boy, Asher, he's 6 years old. We started to build a little insect hotel to try to provide more homes for these little critters in our garden. So I want you guys to embrace that connection that you have with the natural world, that one that you can't actually avoid. Let's instead fill it with really positive microorganisms and critters which can help build your health, to stop your kids getting asthma, to stop your kids getting eczema, as it builds their immune systems to behave appropriately when threats do come along, rather than being freaked out by every different microorganism. These microorganisms that live in your garden train your kids' immune system to be able to understand what's an aggressive microorganism, one that's dangerous, then it has to attack, or one which is beneficial, like that Mycobacterium vacci. So build that complexity in your garden so that you can build that complex ecological community. These are the homes that those predatory insects are going to move into to be able to provide protection for your garden. But just start this week. If you aren't growing something, just get a pot, fill it with some herbs. There's just some parsley growing in that one. If it goes to flower, it provides some more habitat for those predatory insects. The soil in that pot is providing you with that hit of microbacterial goodness, and it allows you to start to reconnect with that natural world, that world that produces our food, so that we can then really appreciate the benefits that it can bring to our own lives, to our communities, and to our cities. But that's all from me. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk today. Thanks, Jess, for organising all this. And thank you, Fenella, as well.
Big round of applause for Nick, Ritar. One more. Let's make it big. Indira Naidoo, Sacha Coles. Great to them. Thank you very much to you guys for speaking this morning. It's really wonderful. And here's some soil that I brought earlier. Here you go. Something to eat later. Do you eat it? Yeah, you can. You could eat it.
Please don't make me do it.
Yeah. You never know what I'm going to make these guys do. So, look, thank you very much to all of you for coming to the very first in this amazing series. It's going to be fantastic. I promise you, general thinking here on the streets of Barangaroo. This is the first one, as I said. It will continue on. There'll be another one in late November, and then it will go on. And then there's a really hot summer program. I believe that there's a bookmark in your packages on your tables where your food was that will give you all the information as well. And if you look at the website, Streets of Barangaroo, you'll find some details there too. What else? That's it. It's been wonderful to be here. I thank you all for coming. I hope you have a wonderful day. You take home some great ideas. You start growing food on your balconies. You start smelling the soil, and maybe you hug a curry bush. One of those. I'm going to do that today. I'm going to eat a pork bun and hug a curry bush. There's my take-home message. Once again, my name's Fenella Kernebone. Thank you so much. Have a good day.